You are listening to the second part of the story. You can listen to the first part in the previous video or by following the link in the description under this video. Happy listening. To be honest, I don't remember much of what happened for quite some time after I saw the photographs. I know I didn't say anything right away, and I remember that Terry looked at me triumphantly for a moment, and then suddenly became nervous when she saw the expression on my face. I know that after this, she abruptly gathered her things and quickly left, leaving me to sit, not moving, not thinking, and perhaps not even breathing, staring in stupor for quite a long time at the offending photographs. But I don't remember how I collected the prints, how I left the office, how I walked to the car, or even how I drove home. I have no idea whether I went straight home or not. If someone told me that I passed a dozen red lights, or that I stood at an intersection for half an hour, I would believe it. My memories only came back when I found myself sitting in my car parked in the driveway almost 2 hours after Terry dumped the photos on me. My fists and teeth were clenched tightly, and my eyes were watery and unfocused, apparently from undetected tears. I got out of the car in a daze, got to the house, and walked through the front door, staggering like a zombie, and walked through the hallway to the sofa in the living room. I plopped down on the sofa and stared at the large grandfather clock, whose ticking was the only sound in the quiet room. I felt like my family, my marriage, and my happiness had been given a death sentence, and I was just waiting for it to be carried out. Time passed. It could have been several minutes or even several hours, until Rosie returned home with the boys, who, fortunately, had run off to play without noticing that I was home. Rosie usually came home with a lot of energy, but lately she had been talking about a hard time at work and was not in the best mood. So it was not surprising that she did not call me in her usual excited tone. Instead, she quietly, slowly entered the house, and I could barely make out the sounds of her opening the closet door to put away her coat, and I heard her move towards the room where my computer was installed, apparently looking for me. I heard her call my name softly, then a little louder, but I didn't answer, not knowing if I even wanted to talk to her at that moment. She checked the bedroom and knocked on the bathroom door, continuing to call my name to no avail until she walked into the living room and finally noticed me lying wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. "Grant, are you okay?" I still didn't answer, and she quickly walked over to me, her motherly reflex of checking my temperature taking over as she put her hand to my head. Her touch somehow made her betrayal clear to me, and I roughly pushed her hand away, sat up, and glared at her. "Don't touch me, Rosie." She took a few steps back, her mouth hanging open, and her eyes narrowed in confusion and worry. She looked at me for a few moments, apparently too surprised or worried to ask any questions. I stared back, quietly smoking, nostrils flaring, trying my best to burn a hole in her forehead with my gaze. It must have been clear that I was not going to speak, and then finally her mouth began to move. What happened, Grant? Are you okay?" I responded with a bitter, angry hiss, my mouth barely opening, my teeth clenched. "No, Rosie, I'm not fine. I'm not okay at all and probably never will be." She moved towards me again, her arms already beginning to open to embrace me, when I raised my hand and stopped her with another statement. "I said, don't touch me, Rosie. I don't want you to ever touch me again." Her eyes filled with tears and she began to shake her head nervously. I'm not sure, but I think it was at this point that she began to worry that I had somehow found out about her affair. Grant, I'm so sorry," I snorted bitterly, sarcastically, shaking my head in disbelief as she continued. "I'm sorry for whatever I did to make you so angry and upset. What did I do?" With sharp, angry movements, I lifted the envelope from the manila and reached inside, pulling out several photographs. "I think you know what you did," I said, crumpling up the first copy and throwing it at her, hitting her in the stomach before it hit the floor. She looked at the wad of paper with fear in her eyes and then began to cry again. She made no move to pick it up, looking at it with fear as if it were a poisonous snake. "You're just a lying, cheating bitch." Another lump, another throw, This time, the blow hit her in the chest. Who can't keep her legs closed? Lump in the face. For the first guy who took a step towards her. Her gaze turned into an expression of utter horror, sadness, and disbelief. Tears streaming down her face and her chin lifted, her already swollen lips pressed tightly together. For some reason, her discomfort made me even angrier, and I picked up the last photo of Devon smiling at the camera from behind her as she clutched the sheet on the massage table. Her eyes closed, and her expression once again inscrutable. I stood and held the photograph less than 30 centimeters from her face, spitting out the words like bullets. Or maybe he wasn't the first guy. Maybe he was just the last of many. Rosie screamed as she looked at the photograph and fell to her knees, sobbing and gasping. No, 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 no. Oh God. No. Looking at her, I felt a brief surge of compassion, but I fought the urge to comfort her and easily replaced the tender feelings with the anger and disgust that her infidelity had caused. I moved away from her and, without saying anything, purposefully walked into the bedroom, lowered my suitcase, and began throwing clothes into it. When it was almost full, she appeared at the door, still crying and maintaining only a slight coherence of speech. "Grant, please. Grant, no. Please, no." I silently continued packing, filled my suitcase and overnight bag, and then brushed past her to grab a few things from the bathroom. She tried to reach me, but I resolutely pushed her away, and she began to sob even louder. A few minutes later, I was standing at the front door, taking my coat out of the closet before leaving. She followed me and pressed herself against the front door, blocking my exit. I looked at her, slowly shook my head, and bitterly spat out a single word. "Go away." "No. Please, Grant. No. You can't do this." "Oh yes, Rosie, of course I can. I can do this just like you were able to cheat on me with that asshole." She started mumbling something as I shouted over her, "Grant, forgive me. I don't understand how I let this happen. I love you and I never intended to. You let this happen because you wanted to fuck someone other than your husband, and you ended up fucking us both. Cheating on you. I was just trying to console him and everything just got out of control." We both paused for a moment, breathing quickly and deeply. Her sincerity and despondency more than matched my anger. Comfort him? It seemed like a hell of a lot of very personal comfort you were giving him. "Oh, please, Grant, please." He was so sad about his wife. She died a few months ago, and he was so sad, and he told me that I was the only one who he can talk to. And I hugged him, and then I don't know how I let this happen, but I didn't plan for it. Wait, did this idiot tell you that his wife just died? She looked at me, puzzled. Well, yes. She was the love of his life, and she had some kind of cancer, and she died very quickly, and he couldn't. I laughed mirthlessly. God, Rosie, not only are you a cheater, but you're also stupid. I know the guy who fucked you, moreover. I work with him. His name is Devon Tinian, and just so you know, he fucked you so that bitch Terry Lee could rub it in my face. He's never been married, stupid ass. He made up all this crap to get you to cheat, and now you're just another notch in his conqueror's belt. Rosie's mouth dropped open, and she stood with her arms dangling at her sides, slowly shaking her head. She could only weakly utter another request for me to stop as I pushed past her through the door and headed to my car. This night was the worst of my life. I checked into a rundown motel, unpacked my things, and, still wearing the covers, collapsed headfirst onto the lumpy, musty-smelling bed. My mind compulsively and chaotically replayed photos of my wife and Devon, and my body responded with intense nausea and deep chest pain that I recognized as some sort of anxiety reaction. I tried to sleep, but there was no chance of it, and I spent the night tormenting myself with Rosie's betrayal, literally going through most of the stages of grief as if death had happened, feeling denial anger, and even bargaining with God, but somehow, no closer to acceptance. By the next morning, Saturday, I had settled on anger and decided that the first person to face it would be Devin. I wanted a piece of his flesh, and I would be happy to tear it out with my own teeth. I knew I couldn't attack him at work, and I didn't want to break into his house. So I decided I'd have to approach him outside, maybe in the parking lot of his apartment. I decided that he would be out of town on Saturday night, so I bought a burner cell phone and called him around 10 o'clock, pretending to be a neighbor, telling him that water was pouring from under his door. Half an hour later, he pulled into the parking lot in an old, beat-up Ford. Having parked wherever he had to, he jumped out of the car and jogged across the entire parking lot to his apartment building. I was waiting at the main entrance, and when he reached for the door, I quickly stepped out of the shadows, grabbed his right wrist with one hand, grabbed his left shoulder with the other, and twisted him so that his back hit the wall. For a second, I let him see my face clearly, and then I slammed my forehead into his mouth and punched him in the gut as hard as I could. He fell to the floor, and I knelt down and grabbed his hair to lift his head while growling, "You fucking little asshole! You think you can fuck my wife and I'll just laugh at it? My wife?" He grunted in pain and spoke. "Listen, guy." His voice angered me, and I kneed him in the face and hit him in the ribs a couple of times. He wheezed again, painfully sucking in air. "Oh my God. Do you think God will help such shit like you? I should probably just castrate you, get thrown out of business forever. Damn, I didn't want to do this, but I had to. She was going to set me up if I didn't. I was about to hit him again, but this statement took me by surprise. I knelt down next to him and caught his eye, trying to see if he was lying. "What do you mean she was going to set you up? Are you talking about Terry?" "What?" He looked at me in the dim light of the lamp, his stunned eyes having difficulty focusing. "Yes, that bitch Terry. She said she would lose my job if I didn't cooperate. She showed me several reports that said how bad of a worker I was, and that she did everything to ensure that I couldn't find a job anywhere. She even said that she had evidence that drugs were found in my locker. Is this true?" He looked at me slightly embarrassed and shrugged. "Maybe. So you ruined my entire marriage because you were afraid of her? Or was there something more? Did she offer you more ass or what?" He gave me an angry look. "I can't stand this bitch. In fact, I've been trying to figure out how to beat the crap out of her myself without getting hit, but I know that if I do that, she'll pin me down. I'm sure she'll get you too if you try to get even. She's a damn schemer, and that bitch has every reason to be." I gave him a doubtful look. He continued talking. "Listen, man, sorry about all this crap, but I didn't know what the hell to do. Trying to get out of Illinois and finally got a job at the San Diego branch, and she was going to ruin everything for me." He stopped, wiped his mouth, looked at me again, and his expression took on an element of anger instead of fear. "I'm sorry about your wife. I guess I didn't think about what she would do with the photos. But damn, you totally screwed me over by telling Terry you knew I fucked her." "Seriously, man. As far as I can tell, you started this whole shit storm. Maybe you should think about that before you attack me, huh?" I looked at him carefully, thought about his words, and reluctantly admitted to myself that he was right. If I hadn't silently threatened Terry with her dating Devin, she would never have used him to set Rosie up. I felt a sudden feeling of extreme disappointment and shame. I reevaluated Devin in light of what I had just realized and thought about his role in this whole farce. In fact, he was neither good nor bad, but simply an amoral actor, a young guy who could fuck anyone he wanted and did it. And if someone wanted to direct him in a certain direction, so that for some reason he would sleep with a specific woman, he was not going to refuse. Beating him up won't give me satisfaction anymore. For this, I need a time machine. I looked at him for a couple more moments before speaking. "Okay, great. I'm done, okay?" He shrugged. "So, I won't expect any more trouble from you since you're leaving town, right?" He nodded, stunned. "Are you leaving right now?" "As soon as I can," he replied with a hint of disgust. "I want to get out of this fucking mental hospital." True to his word, he quit his job less than a week later. I never saw him again. and assumed he had moved to California. As far as I know, he didn't tell anyone that I beat him. I guess I decided I deserved it, at least a little. A week after leaving, I found an apartment near work and tried to settle down there. Went to see a lawyer and gave Rosie a message that I was considering legal separation. The first few days, she tried to talk to me, called me, wrote SMS, but I aggressively avoided her. And not just because he wanted her to suffer. I was having a hard time coping with the situation and was afraid that the sound of her voice might make the situation worse, especially when the conversation ended. But I was desperate to see the boys and needed to pick up my clothes, so eventually I had to go for some basic socializing. When I finally called, I tried to act cool and professional, but the sound of her voice, vulnerable and quiet, made my heart beat so hard I thought it would burst through my ribcage. Somehow, through an effort of will, I managed to control my voice and actions, negotiate a schedule to visit the boys, and pick up my things without making it clear that I was in pain. I hardly spoke to her as I picked up my things, and she stood silently in the living room after greeting me sadly at the door, sullen and silent, like a model of despondency. I didn't linger because I wanted to keep my anger intact, not diluted by any feelings of compassion or love. I didn't tell anyone at work that Rosie and I were having problems, and I avoided Terry at all costs. I thought long and hard about how to get back at her, considering everything from violence to falsifying records to get her fired. But I knew that Devin was right when he said that Terry was hoping for my retribution and was ready to roast me for any attempt at revenge. After considering all my options, I decided that caution was the better part of valor, and began to simply ignore it, which was not so easy, given the feeling of extreme disappointment I felt. In the end, I succeeded by barely tolerating her smug smile and literally biting my tongue whenever I had to communicate with her on any occasion. The first weekend after we sorted out the visitation schedule, I took the boys. He picked them up after school and brought them to his apartment, and since it was new and unusual, they decided that it was the best thing they had seen, for some reason considering it something like an elite club and not a real second home. I wanted them to look forward to seeing me, so I didn't do anything special to dissuade them from it, and told them that we would always try to have fun whenever they came. That evening, we went to a pizza place, rented a Disney movie, and played Xbox. The boys were smiling and I was having a great time until I put them to bed and Sam, my 8-year-old, asked when I was coming home. "Sam, I'm home," I stuttered. "Your mom and I, well, we decided to live in 2 different places, so now you have 2 houses. 2 places to stay overnight?" Sam looked at me thoughtfully. "Dad, I don't think Mom likes this." "Well, buddy, I don't think I like it either, but that's the way it's supposed to be. I have this apartment, and I live here. Your mom has her apartment, and she lives there, and you and Tommy will live in both places. I think it would be better if we all lived in both places. Can't you live at home during the week, and we could all come here to have fun on the weekends?" I tried to explain to him that Rosie and I simply could not live together anymore. But the conversation continued to move in circles of words that innocent 8-year-old children usually construct from the half-truths and euphemisms that adults feed them when they do not want to show them the ugly side of life. I finally had to tell him it was just something I couldn't fully explain, kiss him on the forehead, and tell him to go to bed. I went to bed that night thinking about how terribly unfair parents' mistakes can be to their innocent children. The next morning, I was woken up by the doorbell, followed by a loud knock. I pulled on my robe and stumbled across the hall into the living room, stopping in front of the door to ask who was there. "Police officers, Mr. Simmons. We would like to ask you a few questions. When the police are at your door, 1,000 thoughts are running through your head. Did you remember to pay your parking fines? Have they gone so far as to check your cache of pirated DVDs?" But I quickly put those thoughts aside and decided that their visit was related to a divorce, perhaps a restraining order or something similar. I opened the door a crack and looked outside, and there stood 2 real police officers with a neutral expression, one short and pot-bellied, with his arms folded across his chest, and the other a little taller and more muscular, with his hands on his hips. "How can I help? We'd like to come in and talk to you for a few minutes, Mr. Simmons." "What? What does this mean? Can we come in, please?" Probably a smarter person could have asked for a search warrant, but I just stupidly opened the door and let them in without saying anything. They quickly pushed their way in and took a seat on either side of me, both looking around the room a little and then looking back at me a couple of times before the tall one started asking questions. "Okay, Mr. Simmons, just a couple of questions about last night, if you don't mind." "Last evening?" "Yes. Where were you last evening?" I was here last evening. Almost the whole evening. Took my boys out for pizza, but other than that, we hung out here." "Can you, prove it? Huh? Can you prove that you were here last evening?" "Well, I guess you can ask my boys. I still have the receipt from the pizzeria, I think." "Can we see him?" I went to the closet, rummaged through my coat, and managed to find the receipt. I handed it to the tall officer, who looked at it for a few minutes, and then handed it to the plump one, who looked at it, shrugged his shoulders, and nodded his head. "The time indicated is 7:43. "Yes," answered the tall policeman, writing something in a notebook. I started to come out of my daze and became curious again. "Hey, listen, what is this? What is this about?" The policemen glanced at each other questioningly, and the pot-bellied man shrugged and nodded. The tall policeman turned to me and spoke again. "There was an attack last night, and the victim was badly beaten. We're just checking." His implication that I was somehow a suspect in a serious crime was so shocking that I couldn't help but interrupt him. "Wait, what? I haven't been in a fight since middle school. It's some mistaken identity or something. I have..." The tall policeman raised his hand to stop me. "Look, Mr. Simmons, we have to check all the leads, okay? This is our job. You're not under arrest. We're just asking some questions." I threw up my hands in agreement, but still felt like I had been caught up in some kind of law enforcement blunder, and I had to take a couple of deep breaths to deal with my disappointment. When it was clear that I had calmed down, they asked me a few more questions about what I had done the night before, and checked with my boys that they were with me when they sleepily snuck into the living room. Seemingly satisfied, they both wrote something down, after which the pot-bellied cop whispered something to the tall cop, who turned back to me. "One more thing, Mr. Simmons. Can I look at your hands?" I held out my hands. He briefly examined them on both sides and nodded. "Fine. I'd like to see your forearms, okay?" Without answering, I pulled up my sleeves to my elbows and showed my forearms to both officers. "Could you roll up your sleeves a little more?" In desperation, I took off my entire robe and stood before them in my boxer shorts, my arms and legs meekly spread out like a Saturday suburban version of the Vitruvian Man. "Will it suit you?" I asked. "That will do, Mr. Simmons," the tall policeman said, and then turned to his partner. "Do we need anything else?" The short cop moved forward and opened a small notebook as I put on my robe. "Yes, a couple more questions, I think." He cleared his throat and looked straight at me. "How are things going at your place of work?" "Sorry, what do you mean?" "I mean, how are things at work? Are there any problems?" "Wait, what's the matter? Did something happen at work?" The two cops looked at each other for a second, and the taller one nodded briefly, apparently giving the go-ahead to give me more information. "No, Mr. Simmons, as I said, this happened last night, and not at your place of work. It was one of your colleagues. I suddenly became worried that I had beaten Devin Tinian much worse than I thought, and that he had decided to turn me in, but I quickly dismissed this fear as irrational, since I had attacked Devin almost 2 weeks earlier, and they were asking questions and testing evidence in such a way that it was clear that they didn't know who committed the crime, which wouldn't necessarily have been the case if Devin had pointed it out to me. I bit my lip and hesitantly asked a question that I was almost afraid to hear the answer to, my voice sounding much more nervous than I would have liked. Who was hurt?" The policemen looked at each other again and exchanged glances. The short man looked back, caught my eye, and again answered in an affected tone. "One of the managers in your office. I think you know her, a woman named Terry Lee." I don't know, but I probably gasped a little when he said it. And what I do know is that I suddenly developed an irritating twitch in my right hand, which I felt compelled to tuck into my robe pocket. The policeman continued, apparently oblivious to my increasing discomfort. "She is said to be somewhat, unpopular with some people in your office, including you. Can you shed some light on this? Can you name anyone in your office who might not like her enough to personally attack her?" I tried my best to remain calm and swallowed hard a couple of times as I thought about how to answer this question. Yes, I know someone who would like to beat Terry. There are many of them. But I didn't think any of them would do it. Except maybe Devin Tinian himself. The words, "I was trying to figure out how to beat the crap out of her myself without getting hit," kept ringing through my head. But for some reason, I didn't have the strength to suggest him as a suspect, so I just shook my head in bewilderment. "Nobody?" "Well, they didn't like her very much, but no one would beat her," I croaked. They asked a couple more questions, but I don't remember them being of any importance, and then they thanked me for my time and turned to leave. As they were leaving, the tall guy turned and looked me straight in the eye for a minute. "And listen, Mr. Simmons, if you think of anyone who may have done this, for any reason, you must tell us. Do you understand?" Of course, I understand," I said, nervously biting my lip as I slowly closed the door behind them.